When should we get things right? When they are already done, or when they are being made? Because in the end, the start is what matters the most. We need to get things right from the start. RGE.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this closing night reception for a briefing on the green transition in Asia here at the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit in Singapore. I'm David Stringer from Bloomberg News. I'm the managing editor for climate and ESG in Asia. I'm thrilled to be here with you this evening. Thrilled to be here all day, actually. For those of you who've been here, it's been a fantastic discussion, great sessions. Really looking forward to our panel and to discussions over dinner. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge our summit advisor, RGE, for making this session possible. Now, without further ado, let's get on with our panel, which is on the topic of financing Asia's green transition. And if you'll join me in welcoming our speakers and guests to the stage. And first we have Khiang from RGE, Shan from DBS, and Yuki from GFANS. Well, as I said, I'm thrilled that you could join us this evening to talk on this topic. I'm really interested to talk. Really interested to hear the unique perspective each of you have. You're each representing a different sector of the market, have a very unique perspective. So let's start there with the question of financing the transition in Asia. I'm really interested to hear from each of you the biggest challenges you find in your sector or industry and the biggest opportunities you see. Yuki, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone, and really delighted to be here. Thank you, Bloomberg, for inviting me. And I think everyone is like an expert as much as, and I always rely on your support and engagement. So whatever I say might not be so new to you, but I think the biggest challenges and opportunities, I guess, in Asia, especially when we talk about the transition and what needs to be financed, it's much more than green finance. And we're really talking about how to help the real economy companies that are in the brown economy to go green. And on that, it's a lot of things are still in development, that we're still looking for what is credible, what is impactful, what is just transition. And then lots of new topics are coming into play, like how do we incorporate nature? How do we ensure it's a just transition? So those kind of, new topics keep on coming in. And then at the same time, there's a lot of the new regulatory kind of, lens coming in. So a lot of regulatory interest in disclosure, and net zero transition plan is one of the new kind of things that they're talking about. What should it include? And so those are like both the challenges and the opportunities. But I'll just say that I think ultimately for finance, our role is to, is the supply of finance, and we really do need the demand of finance to be there. So you need clients and investee companies to want to do this as well. Of course, in our net zero transition plan, we put a lot of emphasis on engagement, making sure that FIs go out of their way to talk to their clients, talk to their investee companies, and to create that excitement, to create that commitment and action. But at the end of the day, they need to have it, they need to want it. And I think that involves not just the FIs community, but it involves the regulators, the policymakers, the consumers, everyone to create that enabling environment for the real economy to want those finance.
Thanks, that's great. So Shan, what's the perspective from such an important lender in this region?
I'm going to be really pragmatic. And honestly, that's the lens we have. We've always said we want to be pragmatic, so don't boil the ocean. We want to be impactful, so choose what, really creates real impact. And then the third is we want to be sustainable, by which I mean financially sustainable, because who the heck's going to pay for this transition, right? So the first prism around pragmatism, Asia's half the greenhouse gas emissions of the world, and coal is a third of that for Asia. So you work on coal, you get a sixth of the world's greenhouse gas emissions sorted. But guess what? The coal power plants in Asia are new. The people who own them are making a lot of money. And so how are you going to transition out, right? And plus, it's really, at the moment, the most affordable, reliable source of energy for a lot of emerging markets in Asia. And it's easy for a bank to say, well, I won't bank the coal. It's easy to unbank these power plants. But let me tell you, there will be somebody who will. And even if there's no bank that does it, because they're very profitable anyway, it will continue to operate and the CO2 will continue to be emitted. So the only real practical solution to this is to find a financially sustainable way to close them down early, right? Then that question, who's going to pay? And the way to close them down early, so we advised the Indonesia government, INA, and we said, let's come up with a energy transition mechanism, ETM, we call it, where we will buy it out, we'll get someone to finance that purchase, and we'll shut it down 7 years early. Now, shutting something down 7 years early will actually reduce CO2, so that's impactful. Who's going to pay for it? And this is where I think many, stakeholders, people like, GFANs or MAS governments, in this case, the Nusantara Investment Corp, etc., banks come together and we say, well, we've got to find transition credits, right? And what's the right price for the transition credits to be sold at to make this work so that we can take it down and shut it early, right? Whether it's $35, $25 per ton, I don't know. But around that ballpark seems to be okay, seems to work financially. So then you need to address the supply chain, right? Because another impact was Asia's the big supply chain to the world, the factory to the world. And our supply chain does emit a lot of CO2, right? So how do you green the supply chain? Because frankly, the big anchor buyers, the Western MNCs, Asian MNCs, just want the cheapest price. But now that consumers are saying, nah, you got to show us the heritage, your supply chain and the verification of your supply chain, etc. So the buyers are now saying, the Western or big buyers are now saying, make my supply chain in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, China, Vietnam sustainable. Again, who's going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Right? And so this is where you need boots on the ground. You need people on the ground and you need experts who can say, okay, I'll make sure that this is done and done properly. And so here in this case, one great example we use a lot is H&M, the big fast fashion company. They had a big sort of sustainable imperative. And so we said, okay, give us your list of big suppliers in India. We worked with Guildhouse, who are the experts on verification and calculation, and she had, the CEO then had this cheat sheet of 4 things they need to do. All my suppliers need to change from coal to biomass. They need to have this, recyclable water thing. They need to change the energy switch. They need to put solar photovoltaic cells on their rooftops, etc. So they were quite prescriptive. We took the prescriptive 4 things to do, worked with Guildhouse, and worked with the Farmers Association and the local sort of provinces, and we financed them. We said we'll finance it as long as H&M, being the anchor buyer, provides a regular stream of income to their supply chain, who are going to go green because we will finance their green initiative. So guess what? Win-win-win, right? H&M gets a green supply chain. The suppliers get financing from us and they become green. And then they get more business from other Western MNC buyers. And we have a new clients in India. So, rinse and repeat. I think this can be rinsed. This can be replicated across different industries. We announced this in COP last December in Dubai, and everybody said, well, why didn't we think about it? That's a great sort of use case, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you can green the supply chain, you can think about how you can shut coal down early and find ways to finance this profitably and sustainably, and it's a win-win for everyone. It can work.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Let's come back to some of those issues. And love to hear from the perspective from RGE. You know, a diverse business. You know, lots of different resources, manufacturing. Where do you see the big opportunities, and for your business, where the big challenges lie as you decarbonize and as you attempt to address some of those issues?
I think from the business perspective, the big challenge is really to translate what I call global goals down to local action, right? That means a sustainability strategy over a period of time and get it embedded into the way the business is done, right? And that way, you know, you have very solid plans and solid targets and KPIs. And in a sense, that's exactly what we did. And I joined RGE about 2011. And one of the reasons I joined them is because they were operating on a philosophy of doing good for community, country, climate, customer, then it'd be good for the company. I've never seen such a holistic way of managing business. And that's what attracted me. You know, of course, you know, without any background in sustainability, I jumped into the deep end, you know, when I got involved with APRA as a business. Because that's bioeconomy, that's growing trees in plantations, you know, and absorbing carbon dioxide, emitting oxygen in the process, and then the trees are then used to produce biodegradable products, paper bags, tissue, and so on and so forth, and even viscose that goes to produce clothes, right? So that has been their way of doing business. But in 2015, right, UN came out with the UN SDGs for 2030, 17 goals, 169 targets, 233 KPIs, so to speak, right? And then on top of that, Paris Climate Agreement. So as a business, how do we bring these global goals into our business? How do we embed it into our business strategy? And that's what we did, you know, throughout the whole business. You know, leadership from top down to bottom all got involved in this work task force. And in the end came out with a business 2030 plan. We call it April 2030, which essentially covers 4 major commitments. One is decarbonization. We call it climate positive, which works along the framework of SBTi. Second one is we call thriving landscape, which is really nature positive solution. We have always operated on the basis that conservation is very much part of plantation. And in fact, we made a commitment in 2015 that for every hectare of plantation I want to have 1 hectare of conservation area. We are now at 0.83 officially, but actually within these 4 walls, we have already bought some production land with the intent to convert it to conservation license, which will bring it more than 1-to-1, which means by area we are nature positive. You know, but beyond that is also the ability to fund and operate conservation area, which requires money, right? And we made a commitment in that 2030 plan that for every ton of wood I bring to the from a plantation to the mill, I'll commit $1 to a conservation fund, which would then be used to fund the operational activities. Because we have seen many instances of conservation area operated by NGOs, you know, with donors. And donors' funding are not consistent, you know, and in fact, we are in discussion with a particular conservation area because they are in somewhat financial distress, you know, with the idea of acquiring it so that we can provide it consistent funding over the many years. So that's thriving landscape. You know, it's not only forest, it's also biodiversity. You know, talking about zero loss of biodiversity in our area, conservation area, and working with WCS, WCS to tackle illegal wildlife trade issues. Because if you can tackle that, then at the source, you can make sure the animals, the biodiversity can rest, for sure. But that's just, so to speak, climate. We have to take care of the people. Just transition, right? And we have always worked with communities. So including them in our sustainability strategy, business plan is essential. That they are not left out. Particularly in the area of developing human potential. So we speak to the area of zero extreme poverty by 2030. We speak to reducing stunting rate amongst Indonesian children. At the start, when we began, it was about 1 in 3 kids are stunted, which means they never get the full nutrition and stimulation to develop their potential. And it's just not the first 3 years, not first 10 years. They develop health problems downstream. So we put in money to try and improve that. Today, we are about 1 in 5. So it's a vast improvement, working with the local government as well as national government. And of course, gender equality is very much an agenda in our 2030 plan, plus improving quality of education. In Indonesia, education access is not an issue. It's very good, in fact, but the quality of education, particularly in remote areas, are very bad. So we have to go in, help improve teaching skills of teachers, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And the last commitment we talk is about circularity, because in our business, we produce textiles. And in textile, less than 1% of textile are recycled. 40% of clothes produced are not even sold. And where did they go? They end up in landfill. And some of the clothes, because of blending with polyester and all that, are not completely biodegradable, and they go to landfill. So that's an issue which we are trying to tackle, through an investment with NTU today, to try and develop what we call an urban fit textile recycling plant. Meaning that it must exist in a city with low energy use, low footprint, low chemical use, and so on and so forth, low carbon footprint. If we can succeed here, hopefully NTU can deliver to us. Then any cities, I can just plonk a few. Singapore, 5 million. In a city with 20 million, I just plonk a few of them. And it's just not reducing improving the recycling. It's also improving the carbon footprint. Today, the modus operandi is you ship all your waste to a central location, probably somewhere in Europe. Imagine the carbon footprint. Half of it are not useful. And then you ship it back once you are able to take the recycled material, so to speak. So we are trying to work this solution. Now, so with a 2030 plan and the targets and the KPIs, it lends ourselves very, ready for sustainable link loans.
Sure.
So we actually launched our 2030 plans for all our business in 2020. We were somewhat delayed by COVID. And then we did our first SLL in 2021.
I wanted to go on to that, if I
Right.
can, because that's what you've described is a very comprehensive set of programs and a very comprehensive sort of set of metrics that you apply to your business. It's an expanding business. It's one that's diversified into other sectors. You've continued to make acquisitions. I imagine there's further expansion to come. What then has been the role of the use of sustainability-linked loans? What is the benefit that the company derives from that? And just talk us through the verification aspects, and the kind of, the weight of compliance that falls upon you for.
So before I go to SLLs, from a transition strategy point of view, our growth business all has to be almost carbon neutral, if not zero carbon. So our LNG plant in Canada is designed using electric drives and using the energy from hydropower. On design, it emits 1/10 of the industry standard in terms of carbon emission. That 1/10 is then offset with nature-based solution with the local people. So it is carbon neutral, scope 1 and 2. Of course, we have to work on scope 3 in terms of transporting our gas.
Sure.
We built a new power plant in Brazil, right? It's totally fossil fuel free. And in fact, the biomass energy is contributing the electricity to the grid, in terms of biomass energy. So our strategy really is new business has to be no transition, you're there. Right? While we are trying to transit existing business to the targets which we set up for. In terms of sustainable linked loans, I just checked with my colleague. Actually, each linked loan give me a benefit potential of about 500,600K, which in my mind is not much, because I produce 4 million tons in Indonesia. All I need is to reduce cost by $1. I get $4 million straight away, right? Yep. But the issue is not the amount of money. The issue is through the sustainable linked loans, actually, we already have a framework in terms of the targets and the KPIs, which lends itself to a sustainable linked loans. Is what I said about certification, because I always said you must do what is right in order to be certified. You don't try to do what needs to be certified. And in the same way, SLL is an illustration of it. Because we are ready, we could work with the banks, with a third party, to really pick whatever targets and KPIs there is in our 2030 plan, scrutinize it for materiality, impact, as well as ambitiousness.
Right.
And then that third party will then recommend to the banks, what to adopt.
Sure.
And this is what happened, in even the recent one with agribusiness, about $1 million US. We have ERM to do the recommendation, and the 34 banks are involved. So when this SLL is implemented, it gratifies me because it tells me that by and large, what we are doing for the 2030 plan are in the right direction. Not exactly there, but somewhere there. True. Because whatever targets, they can be used.
And so you can get the benefit of the SLL without...
And then we get a benefit of it, and the people on the ground who has been working because they want to contribute to climate change now sees, okay, there is a material impact. Yeah. And the converse is true, that if they don't do it and execute well, there's a penalty. Yeah, right? Although it's not much, but it's still money. Right? So on that basis, there is a lot more incentives, So in the process, I actually, because I supervise sustainability, I now gain an ally. The banks and the third-party people to help me scrutinize the KPIs to make sure that we are doing right and correct and ambitious enough. And at the same time, monitor and track it.
Quite.
But the irony is, if you don't perform, the banks make more money. Right? And if you do, the banks make less. So my take is a little bit different. I think sustainability linked loans were a great way to kickstart the action, the wonderful work that you can hear Mr. Bay talk about and other companies, to really get them to focus on measurement and setting targets and saying, I don't want to be embarrassed by not meeting my targets, because that's what I told my bondholders, right? But it really wasn't going to be a forever sustainable thing, because banks cannot keep subsidizing. As I said, there is a conflict of interest, right? Yeah, inherent in the pricing. And so when we set off with sustainability loans, I think in 2019, we said, we wanted to do 50 billion. By 2021 or 22, we were almost there, I think. I can't remember when we hit the targets. And we said to ourselves, is it really even meaningful to set targets and say we're going to beat the target every year? I was like, no, it's not meaningful. It's now become BAU. I hope that one day we don't even have to measure them. It's just every loan should be sustainable, right? But the truth is, it's there as a way to set a milestone so big companies can create their milestones, and you start measuring, right?
What's the evolution?
But the evolution
more
is now, I think the big
targets?
guys who have, they've all got their own CSOs, they've all got tracking tools, they use various, data points to track. The big guys should be there, not all, but, most of the big guys that we bank should be there. The challenge is the middle-sized companies and the SMEs, right? They don't even know where to begin. If you ask me, that's where they need the most help, right? And they won't even know, like, oh, okay, so how do I get a sustainable loan? What do I have to measure? Oh, you have to measure your CO2. How do I measure that? Right? So it's giving the SMEs who are in that supply chain, your scope 2 or scope 3 for the scope 3 for the big guys.
Yep.
It's giving them the tools and making it practical and financially cost-worthy for them to implement. Right? And then you can't do everyone because, DBS is like, a few 100,000 SME clients. You can't do one-on-one relationships with everyone. You got to do it en masse. You got to make it work en masse. So this is where I want to give a shout out to Luann from Deloitte. We've come up with a climate and a tracker tool with Deloitte. We work with the governments. You work with individual governments. So Singapore, we work with ESG, Enterprise Singapore, for funding help. And the government here, as you know, is very supportive. So we said, look, kickstart the SMEs to start to learn to measure, track, fill in the forms, and start doing the work, right? And then getting the training that they need.
We've heard in a couple of panels from yesterday and today about the challenges SMEs face, and a lot of the tone has been, whether it's been from companies who have SMEs in the supply chains, whether potentially from lenders, the approach has been, how can we help SMEs? And to be provocative, is there an approach that should be a stick?
When we first did this, my team said, don't do like a fireside chat or a panel. It's not going to work. They need help, like they want practical help. So we did workshop. So that table was about financing. That table was about tech. That table was how do you get people trained. That table was how do you measure. So we had like tables that just went through use cases and then connecting them with people to help them. Right? We worked with Schneider, for example. We worked with various, industry experts that could help us to scale this. We can't scale alone. So this is where the whole ecosystem partnership to help SMEs work, right? You can't do it alone. A bank can only bring the clients in. You then need the experts, measurements, etc. And then frankly today with Gen AI and AI, there's a lot of stuff you can do to make the process faster and more effective and more efficient, right?
Yuki, from a GFANZ perspective, is there a role for GFANZ? Is there a role for the institutions that GFANZ work with to play here to help motivate or assist SMEs?
Yeah, I guess our role is supporting the financial institutions to be able to do these kind of things. So we do a lot of outreach in Southeast Asia, in India, in China, there's a lot of reasons why we do that, but one of the key things is capacity building, that we want to support the financial institutions who may or may not have, hard commitments today on net zero, but are starting to think about it and want to try. And the best way we support their capacity building is through sharing of experiences. So our role is more to bring the net zero committed FIs who've already been doing it, like DBS and others in the room, to share their experience. And I think peer-to-peer learning is really effective. And I think that's what you were doing as well, right? Yeah. So we do a lot of that both at the CEO level, at the chief officers level, and then at the practitioners level. And I think what worries me is that in some emerging markets, there's a lot of excitement by international financial institutions on supporting the country's net zero, but that you don't see a local bank or local investor being actively involved in these conversations. And I think that's a big lost opportunity for everyone. And so we really want to do that kind of domestic outreach. And so we've been just starting out our Southeast Asia public policy engagement, which, funnily enough, we realized that actually if you want to succeed in capacity building, you need the local regulators to be in on the game as well. Right. So our work stream is called public policy engagement, but really what we're doing is kind of engaging with the local regulator to ensure that our capacity building is effective. and making sure that they are excited about what we're doing, and getting the local domestic FIs to participate, but also create that enabling environment to actually use it as well.
Great.
Yeah.
If I can take you to a different topic and come back to you, Shan, you talked at the top about the role of coal, the importance of coal, and really how critical it is in this region. DBS, and talk me through DBS's approach. Obviously, you introduced a policy around new thermal coal, but also DBS, unlike some competitor banks, some other regions, haven't necessarily put in place restrictions around lending to, continued lending to existing coal production and coal-fired production. We're seeing a reappraisal in some markets. There is a recognition that you have to engage and to bank coal mining and coal power if you're going to have any impact, and that the alternative is opaque private ownership and private credit, private sources of finance. Talk us through this sort of evolution of DBS's approach, and how a bank like DBS can most effectively influence.
So we've kept to our stated commitment, right? We don't bank any new coal, new thermal coal. We've reduced our own book by like 40%, and we've let things run off. So we've stuck. You can't make a commitment and not stick to it. So we've stuck to it. But as I said, we also take a different view around the ETM mechanism. And if we're able to now work with regulators and say, look, we will have to increase our coal to decrease the CO2, right? I'll have to bank the coal because we've got to take it out from the existing owners, but we will shut it down 7 years early, right? That requires a different prism, right? Because that should go into a different bucket where you are ultimately going to reduce CO2 and therefore impactful. The other is really to address the pivot to renewables is something that we should, or everybody in the room is supporting, and we should support. And I don't think there's a shortage of renewables around, whether you talk about wind or solar, certainly not in Singapore where most of our grid's from gas, but in the surrounding area, whether it's Indonesia, Malaysia, you've got hydro in Malaysia, a lot of solar in Batam, Sarawak, and also Laos. The key thing here is really the grid and the infrastructure. Who's going to build the infrastructure? We talk about an ASEAN grid, right? And and the fact is, you could have a green molecule, but once it passes through a certain country into another country and becomes a green electron, then that's when the politics come in, right? And whose electron is it, and will they allow it to come through and ultimately reach our shores? So I think there's a lot of geopolitics involved in infrastructure build, especially in the grid. The other is, I use Australia as a good example. Australia is very much in the forefront of the renewable pivot. And even then, they say it's going to be hard to reach our commitments because Australia's a big country and is having to build the infrastructure. You get a lot of farmers saying, not in my backyard, you're not, right? Or you have the bird lovers, etc. So you've got real practical issues to resolve, and that's not something banks can resolve on their own. We all want the same thing. But we have to work with energy authorities. We've got to work with politicians. We've got to package it in a way that it's financially viable. So you get an off-taker, but someone's paying for the infrastructure. How do you charge for it, etc. So, I find that a lot of our conversations with customers around energy transition, and especially our energy customers, often includes how are you going to talk to the regulator? How are you going to engage the government? How is the government then going to engage with other countries around the region? So it's multi-pronged. It's multi-pronged, right? And then capacity building, to Yuki's point. Today, you have to kind of have an estimate, when will hydrogen be ready? Will it be ready by 2030? Some say 2027, some say not in my lifetime, I don't know. But you built the capacity. So we built for dual cycle gas turbines, right? For Keppel, for example. We said, okay, we'll take a view. It may not be viable yet, but maybe in 5 years' time it'll be viable, so we will fund it. Right? So you put your money where your mouth is, and you make those commitments and you fund it. So it's not without risk. But therefore you have to choose your counterparties who are equally committed.
Yeah, of course, please.
On coal phase out, so we've been very passionate about, providing like working with everyone on what is integrity around it. And one of the things that I'd like to add is, so the coal phase out is part of this energy transition that is kind of system-wide. So even if you're talking about pulling out one power plant out of the system, we are talking about the whole system and how we see that transition of the whole system. And I think this is where energy transition is so interesting, because we've been so used to the idea of base load and, you know, intermediary load and all these kind of, you know, work of the energy transition, and that we need to like now start to think about flexible energy, which is a very new concept for everyone. And it's not like we need a one-to-one replacement of the renewable energy. We need a different approach to that coal phase out. And
I think you need a mix, right? I think you need diversity, affordability, and reliability.
yeah.
Actually, the problem with coal is not coal itself, but the CO2 emission, right? If you can invest in carbon capture technology, then what's the problem with coal?
Well, there's a whole other
Right.
conversation about the viability.
I think, you know, sometimes we talk about the means, but the end we kind of miss it out. At the end, it's CO2 that we're worried about, which is contributing to the climate change, right? And if you impose a carbon tax on it and invest a carbon tax in carbon capture technology, there you are. You may have a solution.
I mean,
therefore, a portfolio of energy. I'm not saying renewable is out. I'm saying we should not just push everything to the extreme and swing all the way to renewables. Because, I mean, you know, I mean, some of these like wind, hydro and all that are itself may be impacted by climate change itself.
Sure.
In
I
the long
think
term,
one of the arguments
right?
people might raise is that there's an absolute economic imperative rather than just an altruistic climate imperative, and that ultimately low carbon sources of energy will be cheaper, and that's why they will gain widespread adoption. Just sorry, Yuki, if I can just bring you back to the coal phase out, and obviously GFAN's crucial to the Just Energy Transition Partnership process. I think it's fair to say that we've seen a sort of slower pace of progress in some of the initial markets, you know, Indonesia, Vietnam, sort of flagship markets we're watching for progress. The issues we've seen there, is it regulation? Is it some of the issues we've talked around the role of investors? What are some of the observations you've made, and what are some of the lessons that the global community can take as we look to extend those kinds of partnerships to other economies?
Yeah, I think what we learned is that coal phase out is not just about the economics, that it's not just about finance, and that finance does play an important role. And, you know, getting the integrity of transition credits right is like one key, you know, part of it, but it is just one part of other things that are as important. So politics and regulation and the system-wide, you know, effects of the coal phase out. And it's you know, what we really realize is that finance plays just one key role. So we need everyone to line up, and that's taking us time.
If there was one key roadblock or one key hurdle you could unlock that would help accelerate the process, what would it be?
I think it's regulation. Yeah. In many markets, the energy system is heavily regulated, and it hasn't really thought about, you know, coal phase out. So you know, that energy transition the regulation hasn't been built to do that. It has, I guess, been more of based on the traditional kind of, you know, energy system, and that it assumes that it will go on forever, and that they hadn't really thought that there'll be this new industrial revolution happening in 10 years' time, 20 years' time when it was written. We've
talked in some sense about Asia almost as if it's a monolith, You're all people who operate in multiple markets. So Shan, for DBS, obviously operating in markets that often quite different. Where do you see the most important points of difference when it comes to green finance and to the transition?
Well, I often say, we operate in most of the big markets in Asia. China is I often say this, right? China is a green tech superpower. Their green tech is unbeatable, and the cost to produce their photovoltaic cells, solar panels, etc., wind turbines is low in terms of, and it's second to none in terms of cost. And then you've got Indonesia, a green natural superpower, full of, I think, the most concentration of nickel mines in the world. And nickel mines are crucial in the precursor for EVs, for EV batteries. So if you could combine the sort of green tech superpower with the green resource superpower, you could do a lot, right? And hence, you're now seeing a lot of partnerships between China and Indonesia to create the whole, EV upstream nickel sulfate, magnesium, the precursors for EVs. But of course, the issue around, this is in Kalimantan, in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing accessible to create the smelter except coal-fired power plants, and I need power to smelt because I need to make magnesium sulfate, magnesium sulfate to make the EV, etc. So you've got all these inherent issues which have to be resolved by regulations and business people and politicians sitting down. And then you have, nearer to home, of course, both the whole ASEAN grid I talked about. I think everybody is trying to pivot, but governments are all run by what the voters want, and voters want cheap, affordable, reliable power, right? Try to tell your kids that you can't charge your iPhone, right? And so I think Asia is not monolithic. Taiwan, on the other hand, has a lot of wind, offshore wind.
True.
But again, you don't know what you don't know. How strong is the seabed? And who's going to pay for the losses when your monopile goes in and suddenly it sinks? That's, $500 million lost. Thank you very much. And thank God you had it insured. But even if it's insured, you got to do it again. And you try a second time, and the geologist says, no, monopile is fine, not dual pile, and it goes in by. Right? So you've got a lot. So I think there is a good mix of strengths around the region. China, Taiwan, Indonesia, ASEAN, India. India now, you've got companies like Greenko emerging, great potential in hydrogen, but also pump storage, for example. Great technologies emerging in India on storage as well, which I'm excited about. You've also got the big players, whether it's Adani or Reliance, also moving heavily into renewables and storage. So I'm excited about the different energies you see across, energies meaning the corporate energy, the business direction, you see across the region. But as you said, it's totally diversified. And there's a lot of local element and a lot of politics involved.
Yeah, and RGE, an even wider sweep of countries, we've mentioned in Indonesia and China. You're also operating in places like Brazil, Spain, Canada. There must be a great deal of differences. I mean, what are the most important points of difference that impact your business?
I think there is no specific point of difference. The key thing is that one must understand the ground realities, right? In that particular country, the context is very different. In Indonesia, if you were to say no deforestation, is that a realistic solution? Because 30 million people living below poverty line, where are they going to get food? Where are they going to get income? So there has to be a realistic solution in terms of sustainability as well as development, right? I mean, take, for instance, the case we talk about fire and haze. In Singapore, we are worried about this haze because the haze season is dry season, right? But if you go to the farmers without providing them an alternative to the match, that's the quickest for them, it's the cheapest for them, right? But as a company, we see that, it's something that we need to do because we believe prevention is much better than trying to suppress the fire. So we started this fire-free program, which we go to the villages and say, hey, you know, we will help you use alternative means to clear your land, right? Work with us, you know, we will educate. At the end of a dry season, if you don't use fire, you know, we will give you a project worth 10,000 US dollars. We won't give you money, but we will do it, sure. Right? So with an alternative, with incentives, they begin to bring it in. You know, and over time, it's very clear, you know, that the area of coverage, as we expanded, the area burned has dropped dramatically. So the ground realities is that you must recognize the needs of the people on the ground, right? Which is why we say when you do good for community, what exactly does it mean? Do you think it's good for them or it is good for them? You know, and the UN SDG actually provides us a basis because they come up with the performance matrix of various countries in different areas like quality of education and so on and so forth, right?
Yep. You're obviously operating in both developing and developed economies, though. I mean, in terms of that split, you know, are you seeing different incentives, different interactions? You know, how is the experience of operating and having operations in developed economies different to developing?
Well, I must say in Canada is probably our first experience operating in a developed country. You know, but some issues remains the same. The issue of the rights of indigenous people, which you have to work with them, you know, and working a community and making sure that whatever you do, they benefit from it. They have a stake in it. You know, and that's what we've been doing with the local people, you know, whether it's through helping them build schools, better infrastructure, or even working with them for their offsetting of carbon credits, you know, with their land, so to speak. So these are, I think, fundamental. You have to do good for community. As a business, you have to do good for community, country, climate, customer, then it'll be good for you. Application may be different, right? But the principles remains the same.
And Yuki, just to come back to you, you know, in terms of the work that GFANZ does, you know, do we need to see, or are you seeing enough of a differentiated approach when it comes to, even within Asia and within the different economies that you're operating in? You know, again, we tend to think of things as, you know, homogenous. Is that the wrong approach?
I think we have a lot of conversation on regional pathways these days because we realize that, you know, especially for SMEs that we were talking about earlier, the SBTI, you know, science-based targets might be not realistic in an emerging market in Southeast Asia somewhere. But then the problem is, you know, there is not enough. I think the discussion is still evolving on what is a credible regional pathway. And also, I think there is also a lot of people worried about lock-ins, that we are locking in, you know, technology that needs to, like, then we're kind of back to that coal phase-out problem again of saying that we've got this existing high-emitting asset in our economy and it's still there in 2050. What are we going to do with that? We need to accelerate. So we don't want to create more of those problems either. So I guess we at GFANZ, especially in the Asia network, have been discussing a lot about what are the basic principles around how to assess the credibility or the integrity of these kind of transitional activities or transitional technologies that, like, when is an energy supposed to be an intermediary technology? When is it that it shouldn't be there, you know? So we don't have the right answers, but we've kind of come up with a 4-point principles to say, let's see if we can look at these. And so last year we put out the principles. This year we're kind of applying it to sectors and looking at case studies against it. But it's very contentious. I think we need more conversation around this.
Well, fantastic. That actually, a plea and appeal for more conversation is something we can't have right now because we are coming to the end of the panel, but I'm sure there will be many more conversations to unpack these issues in the months and the years ahead. That does conclude the panel discussion portion of this evening. Thank you for sharing so much time and so much of your experiences. Please do join me in thanking our panelists. And thanks again to our summit advisor, RGE, for making this possible. And thank you all for being a great audience. Next up, dinner is served. You'll be glad to hear. And after dinner concludes, please do feel free to stay for networking and to leave at your leisure. Thanks ever so much. And thank you.